Welcome back to Payback Logs. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're gonna love it here. The first thing I smelled wasn't the hospital. It wasn't the sharp, biting scent of rotting alcohol or the cloying sweetness of industrial floor wax. It was the smell of a cheap ballpoint pen, the kind that leaks slightly at the tip, leaving a metallic, oily scent on the air. I was drifting. The anesthesia from my knee replacement felt like a thick velvet curtain that wouldn't quite open. My eyes were closed, weighted down by the chemical haze, but my ears have always been my sharpest tool. In 35 years as a senior claims adjuster for the state's largest insurance firm, I learned that people don't tell the truth with their mouths. They tell it with the scuff of a shoe, the hesitation in a breath, or the scratch of a pen when they think no one is listening. "Sign here, Robert. Just here," a voice whispered. It was Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. Her voice usually had a forced musical quality to it, a customer service trill she used when she wanted something. But right now, it was flat, businesslike. "And the date? Do I backdate it to the admission?" another voice asked. This one I didn't recognize. It was thin, nervous, male. "Just put the 14th, Tiffany replied. "He's out cold. He won't know the difference. The doctor said he'll be groggy for at least another 6 hours. By then, the digital upload will be complete." I felt a ghost of a touch on my right hand. My fingers were cold, the pulse oximeter clipping my index finger like a plastic beetle. I felt something heavy and cylindrical being pressed against my skin. A pen. I wanted to move. I wanted to sit up and ask her why she was bothering me with paperwork when my leg felt like it had been put through a wood chipper. But the sedation was a heavy anchor. My brain was firing, but the wires to my muscles had been cut. Scratch, scratch, pause. I knew that sound. It wasn't a signature. A real signature is a fluid motion, a series of connected loops born of muscle memory. That sound, the rhythmic, jerky tapping, was the sound of someone tracing. Someone was guiding my hand, or perhaps just using my thumb to steady a document while they mimicked the E in Elias. "Is the notary stamp ready?" Tiffany whispered. "Yeah, but Tiff, if he wakes up and sees the beneficiary change, we're screwed. This is a $5 million policy. The carrier is going to audit a change this late in the game, especially with him being a retired adjuster." "He's 70, Robert," Tiffany snapped, her voice losing its sweetness. "He's confused. That's what the discharge notes will say. Post-operative cognitive dysfunction. It's common in seniors. If he questions it, we just tell him he wanted to make sure his grandchildren were liquid. He'll believe it because he wants to believe he's still providing." The sound of a heavy stapler. Clack. Then the door to my room swung open. The squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. A nurse. "How's he doing?" the nurse asked, her voice a warm contrast to the vultures at my bedside. "Oh, he's resting comfortably," Tiffany said, and I could practically hear the fake smile sliding back onto her face. "We were just tidying up some of his personal effects. He's very particular about his files, even in here." "That's fine, dear, but I need to check his vitals. Why don't you wait in the cafeteria? It'll be another hour before the surgeon comes by." I heard the rustle of paper, the sliding of a briefcase zipper, the retreating footsteps of the man named Robert. "Of course," Tiffany said. "We'll be right back. Sleep well, Elias." She leaned over and kissed my forehead. Her breath smelled of peppermint and something bitter. I stayed still. I stayed under the velvet curtain, but inside, the adjuster's mindset was already clicking into gear. $5 million. That was my legacy policy. I'd spent 35 years investigating people who set fire to their own businesses for a $10,000 payout. I'd spent decades spotting the telltale hesitation in forged death certificates. I had lived my life in the world of insurable interest, the legal principle that you cannot take out a policy on something unless its loss would actually cause you financial hardship. Tiffany didn't have an insurable interest in my life. She had a financial interest in my death. She thought she was playing a game of paperwork. She thought because I was a patient, I was a claimant, someone to be processed, filed, and closed. She forgot one very important detail. In my world, we don't just pay out because someone has a piece of paper. We verify, we cross-reference, we look for the fraud flags. I felt the nurse take my hand to check my pulse. I squeezed her finger, just once, a tiny rhythmic pressure. "Mr. Torn?" she whispered. "Are you coming back to us?" I didn't open my eyes yet. I needed the fog to stay a little longer. I needed them to think I was the confused senior, because a man who is being hunted is at his most dangerous when his predators think he's already caught in the trap. I've spent my life adjusting claims. Now it was time to adjust the reality of my daughter-in-law's future. The velvet curtain was starting to fray at the edges, and when it finally tore open, I wasn't going to be the grieving father-in-law. I was going to be the auditor. And my first finding was going to be devastating. The recovery at home was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Tiffany had insisted I stay at their house for the first week. "For your safety," she'd said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I was ensconced in their guest room, a beige box that smelled of lavender air freshener and hidden motives. 3 days after the surgery, I decided to test the waters. I was sitting in my recliner, my leg elevated, clutching a lukewarm cup of tea. "Tiffany," I called out. She appeared in the doorway instantly, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "Yes, Elias? Do you need your meds? Is the pain returning?" "The pain is fine," I said, my voice intentionally raspy. I let a little senior drift enter my eyes, the look of a man struggling to find a thought in a dark room. "I was looking through my briefcase this morning, the blue folder, the one with my Allianz policy. I can't seem to find it." Tiffany didn't blink. She walked over and tucked the blanket tighter around my legs, a gesture that felt more like a restraint than a comfort. "Oh, Elias," she sighed, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "Don't you remember? We talked about this at the hospital. You were so worried about the clutter of your finances. You asked Robert, my friend from the law firm, to take it to the safe deposit box for you." "Robert?" I tilted my head. "The notary?" She froze for a microsecond, her hand pausing on the fabric. "He's a family advocate, Elias. You were quite insistent. You said, 'Tiffany, my mind feels like it's in a fog. I need to simplify things.' You even signed the transfer papers to move the management of the policy to the family trust. You said you wanted me to handle the red tape so you could focus on your physical therapy." "I signed a transfer?" I asked, making sure to let my lip tremble just a fraction. "You did," she said, leaning in close. "You were very emotional. You cried, Elias. You said you didn't want to be a burden. It's okay to forget. The anesthesia does strange things to the memory at your age. The doctors call it post-operative delirium. It's perfectly normal for you to feel a bit lost." She was good. If I hadn't spent 30 decades listening to the performance of sincerity from claimants who had supposedly lost their heirlooms in accidental house fires, I might have believed her. She wasn't just lying, she was building a new reality where my own senses were my enemies. "I just don't remember the pen," I whispered. "I remember a metallic smell, like ink." Tiffany's expression sharpened. The nurturer mask slipped, revealing the predator underneath. "That's the delirium talking, Elias. You need to rest. If you keep obsessing over these imaginary details, I'll have to call the doctor back. We might need to discuss an assisted living evaluation if you can't distinguish between dreams and reality." The assisted living threat, the ultimate shut-up tool for the elderly. It was the sound of a gate locking. "Of course," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. I waited until I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall, followed by the muffled sound of her hushed, excited voice on the phone. I didn't need to hear the words to know she was calling Robert. She was telling him the old man is biting, but that she had him under control. She thought she had successfully gaslit a man who literally wrote the training manual on detecting claimant malingering and cognitive dissonance. I knew exactly what she was doing. In insurance terms, she was preloading the defense. By establishing a record of my confusion, she was creating a safeguard when the company eventually called to verify the beneficiary change. If I complained later, she'd point to the medical notes she was likely bribing a home health nurse to write. But she made a mistake. She assumed my old man act was a reaction to her power. She didn't realize it was a controlled observation. I reached under the cushion of the recliner and pulled out my smartphone. It wasn't the jitterbug, large button phone she'd bought me. It was my old work device, encrypted and still linked to my home server. I didn't look for the policy. I looked for the Notary Public State database. I searched for Robert. It took me 10 minutes to find him. Robert Vance. His commission had been suspended 6 months ago for irregularities in documentation. He wasn't a family advocate. He was a paper hanger, a professional forger who specialized in predatory probate. I felt a cold, familiar spark in my chest. This wasn't just a daughter-in-law trying to secure her future. This was an organized life settlement fraud. Tiffany thought she was erasing my memory. She didn't realize she was just giving me more evidence to adjust. I tucked the phone back into its hiding place. I needed to act confused. I needed to act defeated. I needed her to move to the next phase of her plan, the part where she actually tries to collect. Because in the world of insurance, the crime isn't just the lie, it's the presentation of a fraudulent claim. She was about to present, and I was about to deny. The guest room at night was a vault of silence, save for the rhythmic clicking of the HVAC system. It reminded me of the ticking clocks in the office of Thorne & Associates, the firm Sarah and I built from a 2-desk operation into the premier adjusting agency in the tri-state area. I leaned my head back against the pillow and let the years peel away. I wasn't an old man with a titanium knee. I was 32 years old, standing in a flooded basement in the middle of a November gale. I was wearing a yellow slicker, holding a heavy industrial flashlight in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Beside me was Sarah. She was the technical spine of our marriage, a woman who could read a 500-page policy rider and find the one missing comma that changed the entire liability structure. "Elias," she had said that night, her hair plastered to her forehead by the rain, "this isn't just a burst pipe. Look at the water line. It's consistent across the north wall, but jagged on the south. This was staged." We worked through the night, not out of malice for the homeowner, but out of a sacred respect for the contract. To us, an insurance policy wasn't just a corporate product, it was a social covenant. Thousands of people pooled their money so that when tragedy struck, they wouldn't be destroyed. When someone lied, when they committed fraud, they weren't just stealing from a faceless company, they were stealing from the widow down the street whose premium would go up to cover the loss. We spent 35 years protecting that covenant. I remembered the day we signed my own legacy policy. It was a $5 million term life with a whole life conversion rider. We were sitting in our first real office, the smell of fresh floor wax and expensive stationery filling the air. "This is for the boys, Elias," Sarah had whispered, her hand resting on the heavy vellum of the document. "But more than that, it's our good faith anchor. We've spent our lives adjusting other people's tragedies. This ensures ours won't be a financial one for the kids." We paid those premiums religiously. There were months in the early 90s when the market dipped and we ate generic brand cereal for dinner, but the check to the carrier always went out on the first of the month. That policy was forged in the heat of our labor. It was signed with the ink of our shared history. Sarah passed away 4 years ago. Cancer, the one claim you can't adjust, the one loss where the deductible is your soul. On her deathbed, she didn't talk about the money. She talked about the integrity of the life we lived. "Don't let the world become blurry, Elias," she'd told me. "Keep the lines sharp." Tiffany hadn't known Sarah. She'd married my son, Mark, 2 years after Sarah died. Mark's a good man, but he's a fixed-income soul. He wants a quiet life and doesn't like to look under the hood of his own marriage. He sees Tiffany's ambition as a strength. He doesn't see that her ambition is a corrosive acid that eats through anything it touches. To Tiffany, my $5 million policy was just a mature asset. She didn't see the nights Sarah and I spent in rain-slicked basements. She didn't see the thousands of miles I drove to verify a stolen vehicle claim that turned out to be an insurance scam. She saw a shortcut. I looked at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. In the insurance world, we have a term, uberimae fidei. It's Latin for utmost good faith. It's the standard to which all parties in an insurance contract are held. It means you don't just follow the letter of the law, you follow the spirit of honesty. Tiffany had broken the uberimae fidei. She had entered the sanctuary of my life insurance, the ghost of Sarah's and my hard work, and tried to graft her own greed onto it. In my mind's eye, I saw Sarah standing in that flooded basement, pointing her flashlight at the jagged waterline. She would have spotted Tiffany's fraud in 10 seconds. She would have smelled the metallic tang of that cheap ballpoint pen from a mile away. "I'm keeping the lines sharp, Sarah," I whispered into the dark room. The ghost of the past wasn't a haunting, it was a mobilization. I wasn't just defending my money, I was defending the social covenant we had spent our lives building. Tiffany thought she was stealing from a confused old man. She didn't realize she was trying to rob a master adjuster in the middle of his final investigation. And I was going to make sure her claim was denied with extreme prejudice. By Thursday, the post-op Delirium act had become my suit of armor. I moved with a deliberate slowness, letting my jaw hang slightly slack when Tiffany entered the room and feigning interest in daytime television. Behind that mask, however, I was conducting the most thorough audit of my life. A quiet audit in the insurance world doesn't happen at a desk. It happens in the margins. It's the verification of what isn't there. While Tiffany was out running errands, which I suspected involved meeting her notary or shopping for things she couldn't yet afford, I used my old company credentials to log into the National Insurance Producer Registry, NIPR, and my former firm's internal portal. As a director emeritus, my access hadn't been fully revoked. I was a ghost in the machine. I found the filing. Policy AL-9982-XM. Status: pending beneficiary update. I pulled the digitized scan of the document she had signed in the hospital. I zoomed in until the pixels began to blur. There it was, the telltale hesitation. When a person signs their own name, the pen pressure is consistent. When someone traces a signature or guides a hand, there are micro-tremors, tiny jagged spikes in the ink flow where the forger pauses to check their alignment against the original. My signature on that document had a stop-start rhythm. It was a forensic disaster. But the audit went deeper than the ink. I checked the insurable interest filing. To move a policy of this size into a family trust managed solely by a daughter-in-law, there must be a justification of need. Tiffany had submitted a letter purportedly written by me, stating that my son Mark was financially irresponsible and that I wished to bypass him to ensure the long-term stability of the estate. She had structured the fraud. In the industry, we call this interpositioning, placing yourself between the asset and the rightful heir to create a management fee or to facilitate a total siphon. I sat back, the blue light of the laptop reflecting in my eyes. The technical accuracy of her fraud was amateurish, but the audacity was professional. She was relying on the senior discount, the fact that most adjusters see an 80-year-old claimant and stop looking for fraud because they assume the person is too tired to fight. Then I navigated to the Medical Information Bureau, MIB. I wanted to see if she'd attempted to alter my attending physician statement. I found a correction request filed 2 days ago. It was a request to add a diagnosis of early-onset vascular dementia to my permanent file, cited from a private consultation she claimed we had before the surgery. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with the cold, rhythmic precision of a man who just found the smoking gun. If that diagnosis stuck, any attempt I made to revoke the beneficiary change would be dismissed as the ramblings of an incompetent mind. She wasn't just stealing the money, she was trying to legally erase my personhood. I didn't panic. An auditor never panics. Instead, I began to flag the file from the inside. I didn't trigger a fraud alert that would notify her immediately. I used a quiet flag, code 402. It's a marker used for internal review of documentation integrity. It means the next time someone tries to finalize that transfer, the system won't process it. Instead, it will generate a manual verification requirement. It would require a face-to-face meeting with an SIU, Special Investigations Unit. I closed the laptop and tucked it back into the lining of my suitcase. I looked at the clock. Tiffany would be back in 20 minutes. The audit was complete. I knew the who, the how, and the how much. Now I needed to find the why. Why now? What was the triggering event that made her move from simple greed to a felony-level life insurance heist? I heard her Audi pull into the driveway. I quickly switched the TV to a game show and slumped into my recliner, letting my hands tremble just enough to be seen. "Elias, I brought you a sugar-free latte," she called, her voice bright and hollow. "Thank you, dear. I was just trying to remember the name of that man. Robert? I think I have a question for him about the blue folder." "Oh, don't worry about Robert, Elias. He's taken care of everything. You just need to let go. Everything is being adjusted for you." I smiled at her, a vacant, wide-eyed smile. Adjusted. Yes, that's a good word for it. She didn't know that in my world, an adjustment usually ends with a denial and a referral to the district attorney. Friday morning, the why finally walked into the house, and it wore a look of devastation I hadn't seen since Mark was a child. My grandson, Leo, is 12. He's a quiet boy, brilliant with numbers, but struggling with a severe processing disorder that makes traditional school feel like a cage. For 2 years, he's been enrolled in the Beacon program, a specialized, high-cost tutoring center that helped him find his footing. It was the only place he felt capable. I was sitting in the kitchen, nursing a bowl of oatmeal, when Leo came home early. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the table and dropped a cardboard box of his personal belongings, a calculator, a worn notebook, and a small 3D printed model of a bridge he'd been working on. "Leo, why aren't you in school, buddy?" I asked. He looked at me, his eyes brimming with a confusion that wasn't an act. "Mom said I can't go anymore, Grandpa. She said the funding environment changed. She told me I have to go back to the public middle school on Monday." My spoon paused halfway to my mouth. The Beacon program was paid for by a dedicated subtrust I'd set up years ago. It was supposed to be untouchable. "The funding environment?" I repeated. "She said we need to reallocate for the future," Leo whispered, his voice cracking. "She said you were getting sick and that the family needed to protect its liquid assets. Grandpa, am I the reason we're going broke?" The cruelty of it hit me like a physical punch. Tiffany hadn't just stolen my signature, she had reached into her own son's life and gutted his stability to cover the overhead of her fraud. I waited until Tiffany came into the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear, nodding as she looked at a brochure for a luxury villa in the Caymans. She saw Leo and her eyes went cold. "Tiffany, I told you to go to your room and start packing your backpack for Monday," she said, hanging up. "Tiffany," I said, my voice low and losing its senior tremor, "Leo tells me he's out of the Beacon program. That trust was supposed to cover him until graduation." She turned to me, her face shifting instantly back into the mask of the burdened caretaker. "Oh, Elias, I know it's hard to grasp, but with your medical bills mounting and the specialized care we're looking into for your memory issues, we had to make some hard choices. We have to look at the big picture." "The big picture," I said. "And does the big picture include a down payment on a luxury vacation rental? I saw the brochure, Tiffany." The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. She slammed her hand on the counter. You saw nothing. You're confused, remember? You're imagining things. That brochure is for a corporate retreat Robert is organizing. It has nothing to do with you. She stepped closer, her voice a poisonous hiss. The money for Leo's school is gone, Elias. I adjusted it into a bridge loan to cover the premiums on your $5 million policy because you forgot to pay them. I'm saving your legacy. If you weren't so busy being delirious, you'd thank me. It was a lie, a massive, clumsy, desperate lie. My premiums were on autopay from a separate annuity. She wasn't saving a legacy. She was using the bridge loan to launder the insurable interest she'd created, essentially borrowing against my life to fund her lifestyle before I was even in the ground. She had made Leo the secondary victim of her greed. She was willing to sacrifice her own son's education to ensure her own liquidity. In the insurance world, we see this often, the moral hazard. It's when a person is insulated from risk and therefore acts with total disregard for others. Tiffany felt insulated because she thought I was a non-entity. I looked at Leo, who was standing in the hallway clutching his bridge model. He looked at me, and for a second, the mask I was wearing, the confused senior, felt like a betrayal to him too. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible wink. Then I looked back at Tiffany. You're right, dear. I'm so tired. The big picture is too big for me. I think I need to go lie down. Maybe Robert can come over tomorrow. I have some new paperwork I want to discuss. I think I want to increase the payout. For the kids. Tiffany's eyes lit up with a predatory glow. The grand payout was the carrot she couldn't resist. Of course, Elias, anything for the kids. I'll call Robert right now. I walked to my room, my heart steady, my mind sharp. She had touched the boy. She had tried to justify her theft by breaking a 12-year-old's heart. In the insurance industry, when a claimant moves from standard fraud to active harm, we stop the audit. We move to the hard takedown. I closed my door and pulled out the phone. It was time to set the invisible trap. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. Thank you, for real. The room was dark, but the light from my smartphone screen felt like a beacon. I didn't need much sleep anymore. The adrenaline of the hard takedown was better than any cup of coffee. Tiffany thought she was the one pulling the strings, but she was about to learn that in the insurance industry, we don't just find the fraud, we let it grow until it's heavy enough to crush the claimant. I opened a secure, encrypted messaging app. I didn't message a lawyer. I messaged Marcus Thorne, not my son, but my nephew, a man who had followed in my footsteps and was currently a senior lead for the SIU, Special Investigations Unit, at my former firm. Marcus, I typed. I have a code 702 in progress. Subject, policy number AL9982-XM. It's personal. I need a silent flag converted to an active sting. I'm baiting the hook tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Bring a notary who actually has a license. His reply came back 30 seconds later. Copy that, Uncle Elias. We've been watching the irregularities on that file since your manual verification flag popped up. We'll be there. Give us the signal. The trap was simple, elegant, and perfectly technical. In insurance, there's a concept called successive fraud. If a person commits one act of fraud, it's a felony. If they are lured into committing a second act to cover or expand the first, it establishes a pattern of criminal intent that makes a plea bargain nearly impossible. I was going to offer Tiffany the chance to double her winnings. Saturday morning, I came out to the kitchen looking particularly frail. I had a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and I let my hand shake as I reached for my pill bottle. Tiffany was already there, pacing, her phone in her hand. Robert, the paper hanger, was sitting at the kitchen table, looking slick in a cheap suit, a leather portfolio open in front of him. Elias, you look like you need some good news, Tiffany said, rushing over to guide me to the chair. I've been thinking, Tiffany, I rasped, looking at Robert with wide, uncertain eyes, about what you said, the big picture. If my mind is going, I want to make sure the kids are really taken care of. My policy, it's $5 million, but I have an accidental increase rider. If I sign a voluntary re-aging form, I can bump the payout to $10 million, but it requires a fresh signature and a certified physical integrity statement. I saw Robert's eyes widen. He looked at Tiffany. $10 million. In their minds, they weren't just looking at a windfall, they were looking at a kingdom. Is that possible, Robert? Tiffany asked, her voice breathless. It is, Robert said, his voice smooth as oil. It's a specialized rider. I happen to have the supplemental increase forms right here. We just need Elias to sign, and I'll notarize it on the spot. He slid a heavy, official-looking document across the table. It wasn't an Allianz form. It was a generic assignment of benefits form he'd likely mocked up in his basement. But Robert, I said, squinting at the paper, this doesn't mention the $10 million. It just says transfer of all rights and interests to the Tiffany Thorne Family Trust. That's just the legal jargon, Elias, Tiffany said, kneeling beside my chair and taking my hand. She was using the boy as a shield again. It was the final straw. Oh, for Leo. Well, if it's for Leo. I picked up the pen. But I didn't sign. I hesitated. I feel like I need a witness, a third party. The policy says for increases over $5 million, we need a company representative or a state-bonded witness. I'm a notary, Elias, Robert snapped, his patience thinning. Actually, a new voice boomed from the front door. The front door opened, and Marcus stepped in, followed by a woman in a dark suit carrying a digital recording device and a heavy briefcase. Tiffany jumped to her feet, her face turning chalky white. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" she demanded. "The door was unlocked," Marcus said, flashing a badge that didn't belong to the police, but to the State Board of Insurance. "I'm Marcus Thorne, lead investigator for the SIU, and this is Special Agent Sarah Vance. No relation to you, I assume, Robert?" The invisible trap had just snapped shut. Tiffany looked at me, then at the documents on the table, then back at Marcus. "This is a mistake. We were just... Elias is confused. He called you because he's delirious." "I don't look very confused to me, Tiffany," I said. I stood up, shed the blanket, and straightened my back. The trimmer in my hand vanished. My voice was clear, resonant, and carried the weight of 35 years of authority. "Robert Vance," Marcus said, looking at the man at the table, "your notary commission was revoked in October. Using a dead seal to facilitate a beneficiary transfer on a $5 million policy is a Class B felony. Attempting to do it a second time for $10 million, that's aggravated insurance fraud and elder financial exploitation." "Elias," Tiffany whispered, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. "The audit is closed, Tiffany. I've spent 48 hours adjusting your future, and the verdict is total denial." The kitchen, which had felt like a cage for the past week, suddenly transformed into a courtroom. The air was thick with the ozone of a storm about to break. Tiffany stood frozen, her hands still hovering over the fraudulent assignment of benefits, her eyes darting between me and the two investigators. "Elias, what have you done?" she hissed, the nurturer mask gone, replaced by the raw, jagged edge of a cornered animal. "I've been taking care of you. I've been managing your life because you're too old to see the truth." "I see the truth perfectly, Tiffany," I said, stepping toward the table. I picked up the document Robert had prepared. I didn't look at it with the eyes of a grandfather. I looked at it with the cold, clinical precision of a man who had spent 35 years dismantling lies. "Section 4, paragraph B," I read aloud, my voice steady and resonant. "You attempted to waive the right of rescission. You knew that under state law, a senior has 72 hours to back out of a contract. You tried to bury a clause that made this irrevocable the moment the ink dried. That's not management, Tiffany. That's a hostage situation." "This is a private family matter," Robert shouted, standing up and grabbing his briefcase. "You have no right to be in this house without a warrant." Actually, Marcus said, leaning against the doorframe with a calm that was far more terrifying than a shout, we don't need a warrant to investigate a report of ongoing felony fraud when the policyholder is the one who invited us. And since you're using a revoked notary stamp, Robert, you're currently committing a crime in the presence of 2 officers of the state. Marcus turned to Tiffany. We've been recording the audio from this room for the last 20 minutes, Tiffany. We heard you mention reallocating funds from a protected educational trust. We heard you admit to adjusting Elias's premiums to cover a bridge loan. And we heard you promise a $10 million payout that doesn't exist to lure a confused senior into signing away his rights. It was a joke, Tiffany shrieked, her voice hitting a glass-shattering register. We were just playing along with his delusions. He's the one who came up with the $10 million. He's crazy. Look at him. I walked over to the kitchen counter where she had left her laptop open. With a few quick keystrokes, keys she thought I was too delirious to understand, I pulled up her browser history. Is the luxury Cayman villa a joke, too, Tiffany? Is the wire transfer instruction to a non-extradition offshore account a joke? You weren't protecting my legacy. You were planning your exit strategy. You were waiting for the post-op delirium to become a permanent diagnosis so you could pull the plug on my life and disappear with Sarah's hard-earned money. Tiffany's face went from white to a sickly mottled red. She looked at Robert, but the paper hanger was already trying to slide toward the back door. Special Agent Vance stepped into his path, her hand resting firmly on the zip ties at her belt. "Don't," she said. It was a single word, but it carried the weight of a prison sentence. "You can't prove anything," Tiffany whispered, her eyes fixed on me. "I'm your son's wife. If you do this, you destroy Mark. You destroy Leo. Is that what you want? To be the man who put the mother of his grandchildren in prison?" That was her final card, the family guilt play. In the insurance world, we call this emotional coercion. It's the last resort of the guilty when the technical evidence is insurmountable. I looked at her, and for a moment I saw the woman my son thought he loved. Then I looked past her into the hallway where Leo was standing, his 3D printed bridge clutched in his hands, watching his mother be revealed as a predator. "You already destroyed the family, Tiffany," I said. "The moment you took Leo out of the one school that gave him hope to fund a luxury rental, you ceased to be a mother. You became a moral hazard. And in my business, we don't negotiate with hazards. We mitigate them." I turned to Marcus. "Proceed with the filing, Marcus. I want the insurable interest clause invoked. I want her name permanently blacklisted from the National Insurance Crime Bureau database. I want her to be unable to buy so much as a gum wrapper on credit for the next 20 years. "Elias, please!" Tiffany fell to her knees, the tears finally coming, real tears this time, born of the realization that the $5 million had just turned into a pair of handcuffs. "And Robert," I said, looking at the forger, "the specialist who guides hands in hospital rooms, I've already sent a copy of your Robert Vance file to the district attorney. They've been looking for the person who forged the Henderson probate last year. Your handwriting hesitation is a fingerprint, Robert, and you just left a fresh set on my table." Marcus stepped forward and began to read Tiffany her rights. The sound of the Miranda warning was a rhythmic, somber cadence that filled the kitchen. I didn't watch them lead her out. I didn't watch Robert be escorted to the cruiser. I walked over to Leo. I knelt down, my new knee protesting slightly, a sharp reminder of the day this all began, and I looked him in the eyes. "Grandpa?" he whispered. "The funding environment just changed again, Leo," I said, pulling him into a hug. "You're going back to Beacon on Monday, and this time the big picture is exactly what it was always supposed to be. It's just us." The grand reckoning was over. The claim had been investigated, the fraud had been exposed, and the policy was finally, truly, in good faith. The house is quiet now. It's a different kind of quiet than the sterile, threatening silence of the week I spent in the guest room. This is the silence of a structure that has had its foundation shored up. The rot has been cut out, the debris hauled away, and the air finally feels clean enough to breathe. Tiffany is currently awaiting trial on multiple counts of felony insurance fraud, identity theft, and elder financial exploitation. Robert Vance, her paper hanger, is singing like a bird to the district attorney, hoping to trade information on other predatory probate schemes for a lighter sentence. My son, Mark, is struggling, as any man would when his world is tilted on its axis, but he's a thorn. He's learning to look at the adjusted reality of his life with clear eyes. He's back in the house with Leo, and I've moved back to my own place, the house Sarah and I built, where every floorboard has a story and every file in the cabinet is exactly where it belongs. I'm sitting in my study today. The legacy policy is on the desk in front of me, the original one, the one with the fluid, confident signatures of two people who knew exactly what they were building. I reached for my fountain pen, a heavy, brass-barreled instrument that writes with a consistent, honest flow. I opened my personal ledger to the final page. Final log entry. Policy number AL9982XM. Status: claim denied, integrity restored. Observation: the insurable interest of a family is not found in the payout, but in the protection of its weakest members. The contract remains in force. I spent 35 years of my life as a claims adjuster. I've seen the worst of people, the desperation that leads to arson, the greed that leads to staged accidents, and the coldness that leads to the betrayal of kin. But I've also seen the good faith. I've seen the people who pay their premiums for 40 years just to know their spouse will be okay. I've seen the social covenant hold firm against the storm. Tiffany thought she could use my own profession against me. She thought that because I was the one who understood the fine print, I would be the easiest to trap within it. She forgot that the fine print isn't there to hide the truth, it's there to define it. Leo started back at the Beacon program yesterday. He called me last night to tell me about a new bridge design he's working on. He said this one uses a suspension offset to handle the weight of the wind. I told him that's a fine idea. You always have to account for the invisible forces trying to push you off center. I looked at the photo of Sarah on my desk. Her eyes still have that sharp, observant glint. I think she'd be satisfied with the adjustment. The lines are sharp again. The moral hazard has been mitigated. In the world of insurance, we say that a loss is only truly a loss if there's no way to recover. I almost lost my grandson's future. I almost lost the dignity of my final years. But because I kept the adjuster's mindset, I was able to find the discrepancy before the payout was made. I closed the ledger. The sun is setting over the yard, casting long, precise shadows across the lawn. It's a good evening for a walk, even with a new knee. Every step is a reminder that I'm still here, still standing, and still the one who decides where the claim ends. The audit is over, the file is closed, and the utmost good faith has finally been restored. Thank you for staying until the end of this log. If you've ever had to fight for what's right against those who thought you were too weak to notice the lies, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Payback Logs. It's the only way to make sure these stories of justice and technical precision keep coming your way. Until the next claim, stay sharp, watch the signatures, and remember, the truth is always in the details. This has been Payback Logs. Goodbye for now.